what's going on, everybody? Josh McCabe here, host of Overflow Beyond the Music. Welcome to another episode of the podcast. We are in season 4 right now. We took a little break from our typical, 405, 404 episodes to bring you our special, our one-on-one with John Steingard, Pac Nelson. If you haven't seen it yet, you can find it on YouTube. You can also find the video on Facebook on our pages at Overflow BTM on Facebook, at Overflow BTM on YouTube. Also on Instagram, Twitter, all of the social media is where you can find us and find that interview as well. And you know what? The response has been really good. I've been really encouraged by some of the response we've gotten, and it's sparked a lot of great conversations. So huge thanks to John again for doing that, just being so vulnerable. Thank you to you, our listeners, for checking it out, sharing it, and just being part of the bigger conversation about faith and how that affects artists who are struggling. So we definitely are not going to shy away from difficult conversations. We never have, and we'll always be willing to sort of, talk about things even when they're hard. And this episode this week, which I'm not going to take a lot of time to get into, features Ryan Williams of River Valley Worship. He is located in the Twin Cities. His church is located in the Twin Cities, Minneapolis, St. Paul, Minnesota. And obviously, if you've been watching the news, you know that the killing of George Floyd by a police officer there really sparked a ton of conversation, protests, riots, and all sorts of things. And it was really interesting talking to Ryan Williams about this. Essentially, as it was happening in real time. We talked the day after one of the, I guess, more dark nights of protests that led to some riots. And, we're not here to talk politics, not here to talk about that, but definitely here to talk about what's going on in the city and how it relates to his call as a worship pastor and how it relates to his call as a songwriter and a worship leader. And it was just an incredible conversation. So this is my interview with Ryan Williams of River Valley Worship. Check it out. All right, what's up, everybody? Life of Zoom right now. My first, I kind of have these things where I've been doing multiple podcast episodes on a day, and Zoom decides that they want to update their app, and they've been telling me all week that I need to update the app or else, and yet I did not heed the warnings. All right, but Zoom's all figured out, and here we are. I'm chatting with Ryan Williams of River Valley Worship. What's up, man?
You know what? I'm doing great, all things considering. How are you doing?
Good. I know what you mean when you say all things considering, and we will get into some of that in a minute. But for now, we'll try and focus on the positive things going on. And tell me a little bit about. I mean, we're all kind of in this weird season of life being a bit different, but. What was your morning like today? Maybe I'll just start. Like, what did you do today? What did you do when you got up, and how did you end up at your computer talking to me like this?
That's a great question. Being here in Minneapolis in the Twin Cities, I mean we're all living a similar life, aren't we? And that's the uniqueness of this season, is that we're all going through a lot of the same things at such a global level. But for me specifically, I mean, in certain ways, with the virus and everything, the state is starting to open back up. The weather's starting to get warm. Yeah. It's been about a few weeks, maybe 2 weeks of me like driving to my office, So you start to get little traces and glimpses of like normal rhythm. So I did that. I went by the post office and dropped off some shoes, my side hustle. No, it's not really a side hustle, but I sell my old sneakers. And so I went to the post office and dropped off a box. And then I did some interviews this morning. And then I drove into the office and met with the team of worship pastors that I lead. And it's really hot and warm and sunny today. And so today, in the present, feels like a good day. Yeah. But I'm sure we'll get to it here in a few minutes. There's a lot going on here in the Twin Cities that is it's knocking on the door of our hearts, telling us a lot of things, and so we're
Yeah.
working through that.
Well, yeah. I mean, we might as well just get right to it. And one of the I sat around talking with some other friends last night. We just had some quesadillas on their deck, and of course, you can't help
Ooh,
but
good
talk about.
combo.
Oh, it was great, man. Just all of the good things were happening, and you can't help but talk about what you see because it's right in front of you. And in many ways, and I'll be honest, I'm a Canadian who's grown up in Canada, a very different culture, a very
Yeah, sure.
very different issues. We have our own issues. I think prejudice and racism and injustice does not have borders. It looks different, and so my lens. As we were having conversation, I was trying to understand through my lens what I'm seeing, because there, again, it's not it's not being head in the clouds or head in the sand. It's just a different
Right,
lens.
right.
So tell me a little bit about, in your words, what's been happening in your city, in the Twin Cities in Minnesota over the last week.
Yeah, I mean, the best way to start my response to your question, I mean, it's all raw. It's real,
Mm-hmm.
and we're a church in the Twin Cities with lots of campuses all over the place in different neighborhoods and downtown and in the suburbs. And the vulnerable side says, I mean, this feels like a war. It feels like a war.
Mm-hmm.
And again, to do the snapshot or the recap, we had a man by the name of George Floyd who was senselessly murdered for no reason, wrongly because of the color of his skin, and any underlying tension that was already there. Obviously, this is not the first incident, but
Mm-hmm.
any underlying tension that was there in the Twin Cities, it broke open in those last few days. And so many people spent their evenings watching television and watching the news follow around peaceful protests,
Mm-hmm.
riots, looters, and we're a few days in, and it's just an issue of ownership for the church, for our church here. This is our city, our streets, our neighborhoods, and it's not even a question of, can we bear one another's burdens? No, this is our burden.
Mm-hmm.
This is not something we're stepping into. This is our fight. And so our church opened up. Coincidentally, our church opened their buildings up yesterday. So we had service all day. Timely coincidence, I'm not sure.
Mm-hmm.
So such a range of emotions. Um, everything that's happened, kind of, I'll call it ground zero. It happened, 25 minutes from where I live.
Wow.
So I have a bunch of kids. I took my two middle kids, my boys, who are 7 and 5. I took them down to Lake Street a couple days ago
Mm.
to clean, to pray,
Yeah.
to sweep, and it was just, we're all going to respond and process through it differently. But for me, I couldn't get on the stage yesterday and lead worship. I couldn't do it without smelling the smoke
Right.
and seeing it for myself, and talking with people and praying with people and doing my part. And by no means am I perfect. I'm not a picture of perfect social justice.
Mm-hmm.
But we all have a responsibility. It's an ownership question, and
Yeah.
we're just starting on that journey.
It's interesting because as I've thought about how to even respond on this podcast to things that I see, the things that we know, because there are a lot of in anything we live in a very black and white world, even in the way people view life and things, and quickly conversations that mean to be listening and understanding can turn into debates, and people end up taking sides, and there's a side of the coin, and I just think that regardless of all of this, I think we can all agree on one point, is that the church needs to be at the forefront of the issue. And I saw a pastor post yesterday. He goes, "I've never seen a place." And again, we can only speak from our experiences, because I'm sure there are churches in that which that's not the case. But he says, "I've never seen a place in which every nation, tongue, creed, and race can come under and worship the same God for what He's done." And the need for the church and the need to gather as the church body is so important right now. Is that something that resonates with you?
Absolutely. I mean, I was just talking to my team this morning. One of the truest, most modern expressions of discipleship for us as leaders, when we're dealing with our people and teaching our people and encouraging our people, one of the biggest foundational things we are realizing is it's our job to tell our volunteers, the teams that we lead worship with on a weekend, to remind them and to show them that the church is much bigger and much greater than just the local gathering within the four walls.
Right.
And the church is not a line item that gets slotted in along with swimming lessons and book club and basketball and all the extra activities and amenities that we fill our lives with. Church is not supposed to be slotted in as one of those activities.
Right.
And in a bigger church, I think all churches probably face it on some level, but for us, being a bigger church, that's one of the foundational things that we are called to lead against, is that church is not a club. And so obviously we've been dealing with that in different ways, haven't we? Especially with not being able to gather in a traditional sense up until a few days ago.
I was talking to a friend, and he's a worship leader. I won't say where, but I texted him right after their church had some pretty public downfall pastoral things that came out, and he had to get up there and lead worship on Sunday.
Yeah, sure.
And I said, "Dude, how did you do that?" And he goes, "This is what I've been prepping for, leading hurt people into the arms of the Father." Is there anything about that kind of describes what yesterday on Sunday, I'm saying yesterday because it's Monday right now, but of what this past Sunday leading worship just 5-6 days after the death of George Floyd, and really the morning after a lot of riots and peaceful protests as well?
I mean, to be very specific for us, we have a song that we wrote out of our community that was on one of our most recent albums, and it's called "World Needs Jesus." And the song was it's not off of this new project, but it was off the project before. So the song is a couple years old, and the song came out of a response of one of our writers watching his TV one day and seeing riots in the streets, but at the time it was riots across the globe, somewhere else on another continent.
Right.
And now here we are, fast forward years later, and it's happening, right here at home.
Yeah.
And so I knew that we'd be singing that song, and the verses are filled with imagery, like when our streets are filled with chaos, when our homes are hit by heartbreak.
Yeah.
And I just couldn't sing that song with authenticity without, like I had mentioned before, taking my kids down the day before and experiencing it myself and bringing some peace and a little bit of sweat to ground zero for us. And so it's a very specific example of how we should live our lives as worship leaders on a broad sense. It does nobody any good for you as a worship leader to appear as some sort of ghost-like figure that only pops up onto the stage, leads some songs, and then when the service is not happening, you kind of dissipate away into the air. No one ever sees you. No one knows you. And service time again. Poof.
Yeah.
Phantom worship leaders back. I mean, it makes no sense to me. We have to do life
Yeah.
with people, whether whatever you do during the week, it doesn't matter.
Yeah.
If you're on staff at the church, if you're volunteer worship leading, I think that's the godly equation: is doing life with people, being in the thick of it, whatever's happening. We're obviously seeing it on such an extreme sense
Right.
with violence and a virus. But even if everything was just peachy, just gold, you still got to be in people's lives.
Yeah.
So that can inform how you lead worship on a Sunday or a Saturday or whenever that is.
No, and I like this, and I like that the tone of the conversation is, we're not sitting here like peppy and let's talk about the new record, and because that's what I want to capture on this podcast, and not for any other gain, but having real conversation. Just because, our lives, we're busy people. We have schedules and things to do, and it's like I don't have a lot of time to waste having surface level stuff. And I want to go back to what you said about that song. You said the streets are filled with chaos, and remind me the title of that song again.
World Needs Jesus.
World Needs Jesus. And it triggered something to another conversation we had. We had Callie from Bethel on last year, and we had her on in September. And many people know about the tragedy she went through in December. But she talked in September about how her church worships through tragedy. Before she had to worship through tragedy. What is it about God almost like stirring the ground and placing songs in our hearts and penning lyrics that we didn't realize we would need for another? Like, what is it about that we've both seen in our own lives? Like, maybe just to help, I don't know. I want to unpack that together. It's not really a defined question other than a conversation starter.
Yeah, I think I have this real clear conviction or belief about just kind of the timeline of God and how he orchestrates things. And Proverbs tells us that the steps of a good man or a good woman are ordered by the Lord. And so he's, lack of a better phrase, he's in it.
Yeah.
He's involved. This whole idea of writing songs at a certain period of time. I mean, I've seen it time and time and time again, where all of a sudden the purpose of a song comes to new light. It's like time release. It's like a time release medication that it's injected into your life at the exact time that you needed it. And I think that just comes from the sovereignty, the provision of who God is. I mean, worship, to me, people are always asking, like, what's the successful worship experience, or what's the real definition of worship?
Or what's the model and what's the template to write the worship song that will get every hand in the place up?
Exactly. What's the formula? And I'm just like everyone else who's kind of trying to wade through, what is that? What is the solution, or what's the answer? And the thing that's really bringing me back the most in this season is I believe worship is really two things. And this extends to congregational worship when you're leading a group of people. We're trying to help people remember and anticipate. We're trying to get them to remember the track record of God, his track record of his faithfulness, what he has done in the past, how he has come through in the past. Mm-hmm. And if you get people to remember, to recall, that propels them to anticipate the hope, the life, the plan that's ahead of them for their future. And those things are so closely tied together. So, congregational worship, the cyclical nature of coming back together every week, it's because we're constantly realigning and rehearsing and recalling who God is, so that can continually push us into our future.
It's interesting to me because there's this worship pastor, and just kind of from what I've seen and been able to watch from a distance, and Instagram and listening to the record and reading about you guys, and there's these hats you have to wear. Like it's like you, it's like you are psalmist, and you're trying to write songs to capture what God is doing in the church, and write words both to reflect what He's doing and prophetically what you're asking Him and believing He's going to do. And that's the writer side. And then there's the musical side, in which you have to play your guitar and sing your songs and sing the songs and whatever songs you sing, and sing them in key and on tune and in tune, and put your capo in the right spot and make sure that your gear is in shape. And then there's the pastoral side, in which you have to lead people through broken marriages, through not failures to overcome addiction, but maybe, returning to an addiction, or private and public issues of sin. Like how do you find, does it feel sometimes like a burden, like going like there's so many offices I have to carry in the role of worship pastor, songwriter, artist, and friend, like
Yeah, man, I've been doing a lot of great interviews lately. That's a really, really great question. It really resonates with me. I'll just say that. And because it does, I'll give you the honest answer. Yeah, it does. It does feel like that. It does feel like that. It feels like a burden sometimes. But that word burden, it does take me to this principle that I try to live my life by, and I try to lead my team by. We do have a choice when it comes to that word burden. We have a choice to carry one or the other. There's two types of burdens in this life.
Yep. Yeah, I know where you're going with this. I like this.
It's the burden of outcome, and the burden of outcome is it would be like me. I'm sitting talking to you with my laptop, and my laptop's on a desk, and the burden of outcome is like me having to carry my desk around with me all day. So I have to figure out how to put my desk in my car. I have to figure out how to carry my desk through the grocery store, et cetera, et cetera. That's a really, really impossible task. But the burden that I was meant to carry and that you were meant to carry is the burden of obedience, which is, like this, you can see this. I don't know if our listeners will be able to see it, but this burden is like a little pen that I'm holding in my hand. Easy for me to take along with me. And that's the line that you got to draw, is I can't strive to try to fulfill all of these different responsibilities and hats that I wear all the time. That's where we as believers believe in the power of the Holy Spirit to empower us to do what we're called to do. We're graced to do these different things in different seasons in different ways. And the most, lack of a better term I can think of, is we just need to relax and let God do His part. That was a great question.
Well, it's funny. I've responded this way too in pastoral seasons, and there are seasons in which, because the English language is funny, because burden can be a negative thing, but it can also be like when you shift the way you view it. I've always felt this way, that burdens, like you must be carrying so much burden right now. You must be carrying so much on you. I'm going, no, not really. I didn't really carry it for all that long. Maybe like 5 seconds before I handed it off to like someone who's much bigger than me, and that's the Lord. And going like, I'm not going to carry that. I don't need to carry that. That's not my thing to carry. And
it's really good.
And I think that there's things about team. There's things about people and doing things in community that allow us to not carry more than we should. And one of the best ways we can carry each other's burdens is in songwriting. When you can sit down and want to pen something and not be responsible for trying to be the only one who's trying to get up and into that realm of heaven and pull something down. And I love looking at co-writes. I love looking at different worship leaders from different tribes and different nations and expressions coming together. And one of the ones I noticed right on the new record, Altars, was Alexander Pappas from Hillsong Young and Free. And I've seen him show up on a few co-writes lately. But just tell me a little bit about how that song got connected with you guys, and and a little bit about that journey and even what you think about him as a writer and worship leader.
Absolutely. If Alex ever hears this, hey, Alex, good to see you again through the internet. Our producer for these last two projects is a guy named Michael Fatkin, who is his home church is Hillsong. And like a lot of other people, we've looked to them on many different levels as an example,
Yeah.
and just drawn a lot of great things from them over the years. And so it's a long story short how we got connected with Mike.
Right.
But he's a great friend and has been a great part of our community in producing these albums. And so we were out. He lives in California now. We were out with him doing multiple kind of weeks through the last year, kind of what we call for us our little like writing camps, like very scheduled, intentional time of writing these songs. And the logistics of it were Alex was here in the States for an extended period of time, kind of unexpectedly, and he's hanging out, kind of living in California for a couple months, and our schedules just worked out. We had kind of had a little relationship with him before, so he was with us for 3 or 4 days and wrote probably like 6 or 7 songs together, and I think 2 or 3 made it on the most recent project.
Awesome, yeah.
And man, he's just a craftsman. As far as the technical side goes, just a huge library of melody. And melody, if you think about a melodic phrase, it's all like shapes, melodic shapes, and he's just a deep index of melodic shapes.
Yeah.
And what was cool about it after the 3 or 4 days, realizing that it was a real authentic connection that we had with him, and he really wholeheartedly believed in the theme of what we were trying to do for this project. He caught the vision for it, and so it really felt like extended family. I mean, he's been a part of some really, really great, huge songs for the global church, and so it was a kind of a treasure for us to spend time with him for the week and it be an authentic connection.
What I find, maybe just take people kind of behind the scenes for those who don't know. You got a guy from Hillsong and you got River Valley, and you don't just go in the room and Alex goes, I'm gonna write you guys like let's write a banger. Like there's a lot of conversation that happens that writers, when they are not entrenched in the week to week of your community, they want to understand what your community is about, what God's doing in your church. Like they'll ask about what sermons here. Like, tell me a little bit about how you can pull together, people from Hillsong and create something that is still authentically River Valley through and through.
Yeah, I think on the musical side, you find common ground with influences.
Yeah.
And even down to collecting a bunch of references, maybe that's songs or even down specific like you can get really into the weeds here of like drum tones or snare sounds. And so we sat down for about an hour before we started writing anything and like just cycled through songs, the stuff that we like. And for the connection with Alex, that was a real easy connection. A lot of the same influences, a lot of the same eclectic taste. And depending on who that writer is, who that extended family person is, maybe it takes you a long time maybe to find that common ground. But for Alex, we all listen to the same stuff, same music. And so it was a real effortless connection. We kind of had this phrase in the beginning of the writing process to kind of help give us some focus when it came to the creative side of writing. And we would say it all out. It was called, we'd say crash the plane. We're trying to crash the plane. Meaning, if you're a commercial airline pilot, which I'm not, so I'm not going to speak too much into it.
Yeah.
But I imagine if you're a commercial airline pilot, your goal is to fly the 200 people on your plane, fly them from point A to point B. You want them to have a safe, uneventful, comfortable ride
Right.
from Minneapolis to Nashville. Nothing breathtaking happened. Nothing amazing happened. That's kind of the point. We wanted to be safe, predictable, getting from one spot to the next.
Yeah.
And we just didn't want to do that off the bat with our songwriting. We wanted to be like a cool trick fighter pilot, trying to do the cool, not just cool, maybe that's the wrong word, thrilling, amazing, death-defying tricks, barrel roll, 360,
take some turns you didn't see coming.
Exactly. And to try to literally, and that there's a lot of risk involved there. That's trying things like that can get you killed as a pilot, I would imagine. And that's kind of what we wanted to, that's the mentality we wanted to have, to be able to hit some of these creative boundaries that we wanted to hit.
Yeah.
We had to have that mentality to get there, and then maybe pull back as we edit through the process. But to take some risk creatively, that's the kind of mentality that we had. And so one of the songs that made on the album, All of Me, which is a song that we wrote with Alex, was one of those conversations where he said, let's try to crash the plane. And that vibe came out.
I loved, I love the sounds of how clean the album sounds, but yet how engagingly in the room I could feel as I was listening to it. Like, I think that's really, some conversations we talk all family, we talk all history, we talk, all of someone's journey. And I do love when we get to talk about the production of something, because there's probably a lot of work in crafting a worship album that doesn't feel like you're disconnected from it. And I didn't feel that at all when I was listening to Altars. I felt like, oh, I can see this, or I'm like, oh man, okay, yeah, like and that's not always common when you listen to a lot of
Sure.
I say local church in the sense of, Hillsong I still consider local church when they put out an album. There's a lot of songs that will come out on records that I go, I don't think I could ever see that translating here. Or like, I don't know how that even translates there or whatever. Tell me a little bit about what you think about, what kind of things go through your head when you are considering what you're writing or what you're leading from other expressions of worship in your church, and going, how do I make this uniquely River Valley, and describe what some of that worship musical culture is like there.
Yeah. So the culture, to answer your question, the culture at River Valley is, if someone were to come to church on a Sunday and stand among the people that attend every week, or I think they would experience something that's really engaging.
Yeah.
Something that's very inclusive. And not in a weird way. We place the expectation on people to engage in what's happening.
Yeah.
We don't, as far as the worship leaders at all the different campuses, we don't expect them just to facilitate the music, meaning like just make sure the band sounds good.
Yeah.
There's an engagement, a relationship, a connection that happens both ways. I feel like we're a church that has equal parts like strategy and planning and service order.
Mm-hmm.
We have all of that and believe in all of that. But at the same time, we have the anticipation or the expectation that in the moment something could go a different way.
Yeah.
And we're not gonna freak out about if something goes over time, or if it wasn't the same that service as it was the next service. So I like that about our culture, that we lean into both sides of that.
That's something that certainly seems to be changing, though. Like, because again, maybe I'm going to lose listeners on this, but there was like this revolution almost like maybe 6-7 years ago. That's like, everyone needs to be doing multi-site. Everyone needs to be doing multi-streaming. Everyone needs to be streaming this, and needs to be exactly the same. And don't you dare sing a second chorus a second time, or you will drive the production people nuts. And it almost became, and as I'd have conversations with pastors, it's like, oh, you only have 5 cameras. Well, we have 10 in 4K, and we have it's like, it almost became this idol. And I sense that the church movement is going, No, it's a tool. It's not our everything, and that seems to be encouraging.
Yeah, I mean, it makes me think of the, without this feeling like a plug or anything for the record, it does just make me think about the real strong thread of the album.
Yeah.
It's just phrase for us. It's altars over stages,
Yeah.
and
Wow.
I got a handwritten letter from a missionary who's a friend of our church. We're kind of months into making this album, and he wrote me this handwritten letter, which I never received handwritten letters in the first place ever. So it was
Hmm.
special before I even read it. But it was like this prophetic encouragement to me and to the church and to the team. And he said, Ryan, you have to remember that every time you step on a platform to lead worship, you're not standing on a stage, you're standing on an altar. And it automatically just realigned and shifted my mindset when it comes to doing what we do week in and week out. An altar is for sacrifice. A stage is for performance. Um, I think it's easy to see that who gets the glory when you stand on a stage. I think that attracts glory to yourself. When you stand on an altar, it's really quite opposite of that. And so it's become our mantra for our team and definitely for this project. And the whole high production church and the swing the pendulum the other way to a house church.
Yeah.
Uh, I don't need to. I don't need to go through the positives or the negatives of either of those. I just think things just have to have the right place and the right
Yeah.
order in the economy of what God's trying to do. And you can have 4K cameras and want things to look excellent, and
Hmm.
nothing can be wrong with the heart for sure. Or those things can become quite the distraction and quite the
Yeah.
self-serving mechanism for standing in the way of what you're really trying to do. And so
It's all where you
I
start.
think,
It's
yeah,
all where you
it's
start.
always start. You're right.
If the goal is to start at the altar, and everything else, you know, is the reflection, like reflects that, rather than the other approach. I think that's captured in this record too. Again, this is probably the most I've talked about a record in specific podcast before, and just taking it right back to that. But it's like it's so important to the conversation that the fact that you guys are trying to capture that feeling on a record, I think is something that the church is sort of catching now in this season of going, man, we just want people to come and have a holy moment,
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
and we'll only get that holy moment if our worship leader and our teams go behind the curtain and just see the face of God. Like that's how we'll lead people better.
100%. I mean, we had a very marking moment without overhyping it or over spiritualizing it. Our very first trip to California to do the very first week of writing for this project. We had no theme. We had no idea what was ahead of us. And we gathered in a hotel room before we drove over to the studio. And our expectation was just to pray,
Mm-hmm.
simple prayer, and then move on.
Yeah.
And it was the closest thing I've ever had to an upper room type experience without hyping it. I mean, we were broken over. We didn't know what we were being broken over. We didn't know what
Right.
was ahead of us, but it was God aligning that team for the coming project, the coming theme of
Yeah.
altars over stages, which we didn't have yet. And through all the, I would say, through all the crap that happened, which crap happens in these processes of making
Mm-hmm.
these albums, and all the stuff that it costs you, we would consistently go back to that prayer in the beginning of the project to keep us focused.
Tell me about your favorite moment uh, on the record. And sometimes it's a song, sometimes it's just even a musical moment that just felt like you weren't saying anything, but the strings were saying something that, or the drums were saying something that you couldn't articulate in words. Like, tell me about a moment in the record that's special for you.
That's a really cool question. I think probably the one of the most special moments from that night and that got recorded was we we played two songs from this kind of B stage that was off
Be altar,
key
sorry.
for Yeah, off the altar, deeper into the B altar. There you go. That was off kind of in the middle of the auditorium, and if you check out our YouTube, you'll see those two songs where it's this kind of a different setup. And those two songs, "Let It Be Jesus" and "Sounds Like Grace," both of those uh, were recorded near the end of the night because we had to make the switch over and all that stuff. And I just remember we had played kind of our last song on the main platform, and the only way that I could get over to the next B stage was like this little video moment that happened in the dark, and I had to kind of wade my way through the people and this huge crowd of people. And I remember getting up to that spot and sitting down at the piano, and we started playing "Let It Be Jesus." And just the new view that I had, pretty much the whole night was over, and then I had this new view of just the body of Christ, and it was a sea of faces everywhere I could look around me. And it just was like a very secret, a very small thought in my own head of, you just can never take this for granted.
Yeah.
And especially now here we sit where we've all been barred from being together and being in big groups and feeling and experiencing the power of getting together. I remember thinking that night, wow, I feel like the most blessed guy on the planet, because here we are in the body of Christ, and this is all about us meeting with God. And so that was my moment.
That's powerful, man. And if you were to let someone, if you were to let somebody who's not heard the record hear a moment that you feel like encapsulates the record, would "Let It Be Jesus" be a good moment for them to hear?
I think so, yeah. Or the other song, "Sounds Like Grace," from that B stage kind of section of the project. I think that would be, yeah.
All right.
"Let It Be
Well,
Jesus," so those, yeah.
I'll break the rules. I'll play a little bit of both of them as we close off this interview. But I want to ask you just one last thing, just again to go back to what we're all dealing with and watching happen before our eyes as we listen to this. And I realize that podcasts don't are not necessarily time sensitive, and you may listen to this a year from now and wonder what we're referring to, and then you have to look at the calendar and realize what was happening at the time. But as we look at the tensions that we're seeing before our eyes, both in the Twin Cities and Minnesota as a result of the death of George Floyd, what's something that, and this is for me too, being a Canadian and being an outsider, what is something that you wish people could understand about what's happening specifically in your city that other people might look and go, no, but you don't understand? That you don't understand what's been happening, and you don't understand the history. You don't understand sort of some of the background of it. What is something you wish people could understand?
That's a great question. I would say the biggest thing is to keep it authentic, but to make it hopeful, to keep it hopeful. People are afraid.
Right.
People are fearful. I have family members who will go to our church and who live in these different communities, who for the last few nights, I have a brother-in-law who has slept on the couch in the front living room of his house with a gun, with his gun at his side. And so that's the most authentic picture of stuff is really happening in and close to our homes and our families and our kids. And we're inundated with so much screen content in our lives.
Yeah.
So much content, so many video clips on our phones and our TVs that you can start to get lulled to sleep even after something like this, the horrific death of George Floyd and the aftermath of that. We're, I don't know, we're 5 days in, 6 days in.
Yeah.
And we're starting to see the same things over and over again. And already you can start getting lulled to sleep. But what I think people, myself included, need to be reminded of is this is real. These are real communities and real families and real homes and real businesses that are being torn apart. And the huge umbrella of everything that's wrong with what's going on, it's all under the umbrella of we just need Jesus. It's a sin issue. It's a depravity issue. Our hearts are broken. Our world is broken.
Yeah.
Our kids, our families are broken. And the only answer is Jesus.
Well, thanks for taking time. And I want to just end right there and just know that, Ryan, we are praying for your city. We're praying for your church. And, as a Canadian who's living in America right now, I'm praying for this nation more than I ever have. And I'm praying for our leaders and praying for wisdom, praying for grace, praying for understanding, and praying that the enemy would stop taking a foothold in dividing us, because Jesus came to unite us. And so I'm tired of seeing the enemy get any sort of foothold. But I think a great response is to worship. So here's Let It Be Jesus from the new record Altars by River Valley Worship. Check it out.
It sounds like grace to me. Oh, how sweet the sound. Oh, how sweet the sound. Oh, how sweet the sound.
All right, there you have it. There is my conversation with Ryan Williams of River Valley Worship. You can check out their new record, Altars. It's available everywhere now. Make sure you get it. You'll really love it. We played a couple clips there. Sounds Like Grace and Let It Be Jesus. Just an incredible, incredible album. Really, really enjoying it. Make sure that you follow us on Instagram and Twitter and Facebook at Overflow BTM is where to find us. If you have not yet, please hit that subscribe button on wherever you're listening to this podcast, whether it be Spotify, Apple Music, Google, YouTube, wherever. Hit that little subscribe button. It really helps us out, and you'll get to find out when we have new content available. But that's all for this episode of Overflow Beyond the Music Season 4, episode number 6. My name is Josh McCabe. We'll see you again next time.